Yippee-yi-yi, yippee-yi-oh.
Hello, my fellow readers. My name is Greg. This is Ghost Readers in the Sky. I'm here today with two more Victorian poems. Again, poems that are thought of as being written for children, like I did with the poems from A Child's Garden of Verses a couple weeks ago. We're going to start with a poem by Lewis Carroll, who of course is best known for Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. That second book was written in 1887, and it contained a couple of poems that are really well known, Jabberwocky for one, and the one I'm going to read today, The Walrus and the Carpenter. You often see these two novels bound together, published together. I found this copy at my local library. Someday I ought to find a real copy for my bookshelf, but for now, this one works. This one is illustrated, and we do have an illustration of the Walrus and the Carpenter. And now my reading of The Walrus and the Carpenter by Lewis Carroll. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright, and this was odd, because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily, because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet as wet can be. The sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. "If this were only cleared away," they said, "it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose," the Walrus said, "that they could get it clear?" "I doubt it," said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the Walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat, and this was odd because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4, and thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The Walrus and the Carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low. And all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the Walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath, and some of us are fat." "No hurry," said the Carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the Walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed. But not on us, the oysters cried, turning a little blue. After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do. The night is fine, the walrus said. Do you admire the view? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice. The carpenter said nothing, but cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice. It seems a shame, the walrus said, to play them such a trick, after we brought them out so far and made them trot so quick. The carpenter said nothing, but the butter's spread too thick. I weep for you, the walrus said. I deeply sympathize. With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. Oh, oysters, said the carpenter, you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again? But answer came there none. And this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. It's from Lewis Carroll, Walrus and the Carpenter, from Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There, 1887. Next, I'm going to read a poem from Edward Lear, who was known primarily, I think, for his limericks, but he was definitely the prime purveyor of nonsense poems, Victorian era. And I'm going to read The Owl and the Pussycat, which I've seen in many editions. I don't remember where I first heard it. I found this version again at the library, illustrated by James Marshall. Here we go. Here's the owl and the pussycat going to sea in a beautiful pea green boat. And here's the piggy with the ring on its nose. Edward Lear first published this poem in 1870 in the magazine Our Young Folks. And here it is, my reading of The Owl and the Pussycat by Edward Lear. The owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money tied up in a 5-pound note. The owl looked up to the stars above and sang to a small guitar, "Oh, lovely pussy, pussy you are, you are, you are. What a beautiful pussy you are." Pussy said to the owl, "You elegant fowl, how charmingly sweet you sing. Oh, let us be married, too long have we tarried, but what shall we do for a ring?" They sailed away for a year and a day to the land where the bong tree grows, and there in a wood a piggywig stood, with a ring at the end of his nose, his nose, his nose, with a ring at the end of his nose. "Dear pig, are you willing to sell for 1 shilling your ring?" said the piggy. "I will." So they took it away and were married next day by the turkey who lives on the hill. And they dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon. And hand in hand on the edge of the sand, they danced by the light of the moon, the moon, the moon. They danced by the light of the moon. There we go, 2 more poems for Victober, Victorian literature in October. Let me know if these were new to you. I've heard both of these for so many years that I think they're old hat. But let me know if they were new to you. I'd just be curious. And there will be more Victorian poetry coming up. Be some more Victorian literature on the channel as we continue to celebrate Victober. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate everything you do. And until next time, my fellow readers, my name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky.
Yippee!